Scott Galloway is always the answer for masculinity from the left, but he gets a few things wrong when he says that men should provide, protect, and procreate, but the foundation with which he lays that comes from a wrong-headed place. Let's get into it.
Not true. You will be disproportionately evaluated based on your economic viability. Figure out how to make money.
Before we go further, my name is Casey. I've been a husband, father, and a therapist for more than a decade, and I have seen the decline of masculinity and the ways that it has been treated as toxic in our society. And if you can get behind a future of faith, fatherhood, and freedom in America, I would love your support. Let's tell the truth to men, one video, one day at a time. Let's get into exactly what Scott said and why he comes at it from a wrong view. Before we criticize Scott, I do believe that he does a lot of good for masculinity and manhood. I believe he has some good messaging for men and boys, and that he has participated actively in organizations that are trying to uplift men. And so, although he comes at it from a proud leftist perspective by his own words and his own framing, I do believe that he does some fundamental good for men, and at least he's able to put this subject matter on the table with leftists and with his cohort over on the liberal side, and they might actually listen to him because he has not been ostracized to the point of not being able to speak in public. But he went on the TRIGGERNOMETRY podcast, which is, let's say, a center-left. If you were in Great British politics, it would be center-right podcast, but they definitely come from sort of the secular atheist view, or at best deist view of how the world and politics works. But he has a recipe, and it takes him a long time to deliver it, but he has 3 fundamental ways that men could become men again and operate in the public. And this is his liberal world order recipe, and one that, even though the push might be correct, he's going to get the premise wrong, which means that eventually it will fail, because this is the exact premise with which we have been operating as a society for the last several decades, and it's led to the disillusion of men from polite society.
And I think of it as 3 legs of the stool. The first is to be a provider, and that upsets some people. I think every young man should assume at some point he's going to need to take economic responsibility for his household. And by the way, sometimes that means getting out of the way and being more supportive of your partner who might be better at that whole money thing. But I think a pretty decent place to start as a man is that we live in a capitalist society, and the way the world is I will be disproportionately evaluated by other people, and my self-esteem will disproportionately be driven by my economic viability. And that you need to get certified, you need to show discipline, you need to work hard, you need to have the rational thinking to spend less than you make so that you can start saving some money. But
the first thing that Scott says is that he believes men should be able to provide, and that if a man is trying to dictate to the world what his value is, it is quantifiable if he's able to provide. And Scott has sort of the idea that if men just become more comfortable with risk, that they would be able to do this because they would have many attempts and failures and eventually find their niche in ways that they could provide for a woman, or in his case, as he states, another man. So the problem with this orientation is that Scott grew up in a world where young men were at least minimally equal in their advantage, or as he would say, that he was privileged and that he got many advantages over women. Now we grow up in a world where women are graduating college 2-to-1 over men. They're intentionally being lifted up in the boardrooms and in the companies as diversity, equity, and inclusion is one of the pushes of the modern liberal world order. And the HRification of the workplace means that there have been really a lot of administrative roles that are being fulfilled by women, and we've created HR departments and administration departments in companies and out of these large industries that it wasn't necessary to have HR. It wasn't necessary to just monitor and nanny everyone to death. And the rise of the social worker, even in New York, as they're attempting to make social workers fight on the front lines in place of police officers. This is the nanny state coming made manifest, and men just simply don't have the ability to be able to be vaunted into the role of the provider like Scott did. That doesn't mean it's impossible, and I don't want to be a doomer. There are still ways, and I would like to think that I was an example, but I still think it's worse for Zoomers than it was for millennials by leaps and bounds because of the economic disparities between the top and the bottom. And Scott lives in a world where that was not as true when he was coming through as it is now. And so while he's right in his first assumption of what it could be to be a man, the quantifiable way that men are measured by competence and value is their money. But the advantages just simply aren't there the way they were when he was coming up.
You can move to the second thing, and that is being a protector. The jobs I think we view as being most masculine, cop, fireman, military, at the end of the day, they all do one thing: they protect.
The second way that Scott is trying to tell men that they can rise into their role as men is to be protectors. And he's talking mostly about economics here, I think, because Scott and his liberal friends, other than Hassan Abi, not a single one of them is really looking to testosterone and masculinity as being someone who is physically strong. The liberal world order wants their men to be creamy. They want their men to be emotionally attuned. They want their men to be well-read and well-educated, but not necessarily able to utilize their physical strength for anything good. And the protectorate, the ways that Christianity, along with conservative values, along with heritage, necessitated that men be strong because they were the protector, not just the financial provider, but the protector of their family. And up until 5 minutes ago, historically, that meant that you needed physical strength. And so if you're going to look towards being a protector, you must look towards the heritage of masculinity, which comes from a place of conservatism. It comes from a place of rooted manhood as a part of the hierarchy, and one that is the patriarch in their family and even, yes, in society. And so if we're looking to men as protectors, it's built on a patriarchal set of values, one which Scott Galloway would quickly refute if asked.
Is procreation. We talked about this earlier. Embrace your horniness. Put on a cool coat. Approach a woman. Get used to know.
The last part that Scott says it is required to become a man and to be good and fruitful at being a man is to be a procreator. He says use your masculine energy and your desire to seek relationships for the improvement of yourself and your future spouse, your future partner. And I do agree that this are the neurochemical ways that we have been given fuel and ammunition and motivation to pursue relationships. It does make us better as men. It does make society better as we seek to be worthy in relationships, as we seek to make ourselves as available to climb the hierarchy, to climb the competence ladder as possible. That requires that we do make ourselves better as men in pursuit of women that are what we see as high status, and usually that's physical beauty. Like I talked with Mark Defant about several days ago, that physical beauty is sort of the feminine marker of availability within relationships, and men have the quantifiable markers of physical strength and potentially economics. So what Scott is saying in the procreate area is overall true. I believe that he also dictates, or he prescribes, that spicy material online is another thing that needs to be stiff-armed and refuted, and that digital relationships, or what he calls synthetic relationships, are, up to 1/3 of people are basically dating AI at this point in younger generations, and that is an understanding of the problem in an accurate way. However, what Scott prescribes in terms of using your desire to procreate for the benefit of a family and of society, he takes a fundamental atheistic view that what you can get now is all there is, and that leads to a little bit of a mistreatment of what relationships are for and what the legacy building is that will be passed on to your children. Because if all you have is the time that's available while you're here, then you will mistreat some of the opportunities that are available within parenting, within relationships, and ultimately that has an effect on the larger society.
But the biggest unlock for me has been my atheism. I genuinely believe that I'm going to look into my kids' eyes someday and know our relationship's coming to an end. And that finite nature of life, or recognition of the finite nature of life. And also I want to be clear, my views that, there was nothing in the world and then the universe exploded are no less crazy than any religious person's views. So I don't disparage religion. I actually think we need more religious institutions, and I think young men would benefit from more church or temple or mosque, whatever it might be, attendance. But that sense of the finite nature of life has made me so much more courageous and emotive.
In conclusion, Scott Galloway on the TRIGGERNOMETRY podcast didn't get it all wrong. He has some good ideas about what the fundamental problems are, but he comes from a place, from the liberal framing, that will ultimately misrepresent what it is to be a man, because we have, my greatest argument against what Scott has to say is that the liberal framing for what masculinity is supposed to be is precisely what we have been trying to do for the last 60 years, and it has led to the disillusionment of men from society. And so, although he might have some good prescriptions, the framing and the place that it came from is what has already been tried. And so in conclusion, I want to look at the masculine ideal and the difference that is between the liberal world order and the conservative heritage that is really the populist view, the nationalist view that is coming back. The old gods, the strong gods are coming back, as R.R. Reno says. So let's look at these quickly. The liberal world order wants their men sensitive and emotionally expressive. They want complete equality within the partnership. No one is an authority above the other within the relationship. They deconstruct traditional roles, so men could be the stay-at-home dads. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that is almost treated as a fundamental good and improvement if men are taking on traditionally feminine roles. They want inclusive and socially conscious men. They want career flexibility. So the irony is he wants men to be a provider, but then when men fail to be the pinnacle provider within the relationship, that would dissolve the respect that those women have for them, and ultimately it could lead to less satisfaction in relationships. They want their relationships to be collaborative, no hierarchy, and strength equals empathy and adaptability in men from the liberal world order. That is the problem, is they want you to be empathic first and use your strength second. So even though Scott said you should be strong and you should be a protector and you should be a provider, ultimately those things are all going to be dissuaded in the liberal world order's framing of masculinity. Now let's look at the conservative heritage order of masculinity. Strong and protective. Leaders. Men are the leaders and providers. They're tradition oriented, bringing your heritage into the commonality and understanding within your family. Duty before self, putting others as higher than yourselves or causes as higher than yourself. This is impossible, very nearly impossible, when you take an atheistic worldview, because the atheist puts themselves at the highest possible place in their order of operation, in their ordo mori, their order of love, the self before everything else. And that changes how your children are raised. That changes how what you pass down from generation to generation. And then the conservative worldview says faith and family anchored is, and this is obviously a drastic difference from the liberal world order, along with comfortable. We are comfortable with hierarchy. We want there to be men at the pinnacle. At least the patriarchy means that I work in a complementary way with my wife. There are strengths that men have that women don't have, and vice versa, and we'll play off of those as was God ordained in order to create the best possible relationships. And then strength equals discipline and responsibility. If I'm not taking responsibility, if I'm not having discipline, then ultimately, as Jordan Peterson would say, I'm not living up to the ideal. I'm not shooting at the highest target. I'm not shooting at the highest good, which is the way that will fundamentally get the most value, not just out of our lives, but out of masculinity and men in general. It's time that we took what was good about what Scott Galloway has to say. We apply the correct framing, premise, and foundation for what it looks like, where it comes from, to be an appropriately right-minded man, and then push him in the direction of understanding that his are incompatible. You cannot take a liberal left view of masculinity and combine it with some of what he said if you don't have the appropriate foundation, the appropriate framing in heritage values of patriarchy, of duty to others before self, and of responsibility being the highest ideal that we can shoot for in manhood. If you would like to prop up this Midwestern midwit, mid-man, in my pursuit of helping not just my clients in therapy, but also the men that might listen to this channel have a better life, I would love your support. Please like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate you watching to the end.